Yeah, I think we can get going. Some of the beginning part fills in just a little context that I'll give a good, minute or two just to allow some additional people to drop in.
Yeah, and just I think we will mention now that we are recording this session, and Kaylee, will the attendees be getting the recording?
Yes, they will. They'll be getting a recording after the webinar.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure of that because I had some people who messaged me that they were not going to be able to make it, and they wanted that as well. So anyone who has signed up gets a recording.
Correct.
All right. So I guess we'll get started. I'm Bob Erdischek at Yellowdig. Just a little teeny bit about me if you haven't met me before. I used to work at the turn of the century in online learning, where I helped faculty and faculty get their courses online, whether that was in a distance course or in a blended course. Even back then at the turn of the century, didn't think that the tools and the pedagogy were all that great for online learning, and it drove me away to some degree. And I started working as a political science professor for over a decade, where I did all kinds of crazy student engagement experiments inside and outside of the classroom. And then I found Yellowdig and really became convinced that this is what I had been looking for all those years. So that's who I am. I wanted to introduce you to our head of success, Brian Verdine, our head of client success, excuse me. Although I'm sure he's successful in other ways as well. And he'll be answering a lot of these questions that you've submitted in advance, and we appreciate that. And Kaylee Starr, our growth and partnerships specialist, who put this all together. And at the end, she'll be telling you about some upcoming events. So I think with that, let's get started. And let me just reiterate that we did solicit a number of questions before this event because we wanted to make sure that it went well and that there weren't repeating questions showing up in the chat over and over again. We thought this was a good way to go, and we've been able to design a presentation that will best answer all of these questions. So with that, I'm going to say hello to Brian, and go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, hi everyone. So just a little on my background. My background has all been in psychology and education. Got my PhD from Vanderbilt, and then went to a postdoc at the University of Delaware. And along that journey, I sort of found myself interested in applying a lot of what I had learned. And so I jumped into the ed tech arena. I've been at Yellowdig for about a little over 2 years at this point. And when I arrived, I was really tasked with understanding what made our platform work, understanding what professors were finding worked or didn't, talking to students, talking to faculty, trying to get as much as I could about how the platform should work and what our data told us. And so we're definitely going to cover a lot of that in answering your questions. And I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, I'll jump in. For anybody, we always get a few attendees at these kinds of things that have never seen Yellowdig before. So if that's the case, this is what Yellowdig looks like in the center of your screen inside of Canvas course shell, which is here. Our platform launches inside. It's a single scrolling feed design. It looks really similar to social media. And the idea behind Yellowdig is really that we see ourselves as a community building system for really connecting students together. We've worked, almost exclusively in higher ed, and we focus on privacy, configurability. It's highly secure. We don't sell data, outside of the universities own the data, so we don't, advertise or monetize that data. And the biggest thing is that it's a gamified platform, that awards students points as they're participating, which both encourages students to participate and provides a grade that sort of helps faculty members.
All right.
So that's the quick and dirty. Bob, do you want to talk about this slide a little bit?
Sure. So most of you are probably familiar with Yellowdig as a community engagement tool in your formal learning spaces, in your courses. But Yellowdig, as many of you know, doesn't only live in the LMS and the learning management system, it can live outside. One of the great advantages to Yellowdig communities are that they're persistent. They do not need to end or start with the beginning of a semester. And this allows a number of different use cases that you may not have considered. You can use them for anything from student clubs to some schools have used them for virtual orientations during COVID where they could not have their students meet in person, and this allowed students to meet each other and interact in an asynchronous way. And the interesting thing that happened with those are that not only did they interact during those orientations, but the persistence of the community allowed those students to continue interacting not only in the summer, but also as the fall came on and they were still able to maintain those relationships and keep affinity with those institutions. But really, the uses of Yellowdig are as wide as your imaginations, anywhere from keeping alumni engaged or following first-year experience students all the way throughout. I think we'll just leave it at that for the moment, Brian.
Yeah. So let's jump into the questions.
So let me just preface this by reiterating, especially for anyone who came in late. The way we decided to format this is by getting your questions first so that we could make the most of this hour. These are sort of the questions that we did receive from quite a number of people, and there were, as you'd probably expect, many duplicates. So if the wording isn't exactly as you submitted it, I think you'll see that we are covering the questions that you did submit. So let's start with number one. Where is the best place to learn about Yellowdig, Brian?
Yeah, so we kind of designed help.yellowdig.com as a one-stop shop for your questions. And this is what that page looks like when you sign into your browser. You know, a lot of questions, we focused a lot on trying to build documentation, especially for Yellowdig Engage, in order to make sure that people can find what they need. So the first thing I would recommend is look through the knowledge base. And currently we still have some documentation for Classic. So just make sure if you're using Yellowdig Engage, and hopefully almost all of you are at this point, that you select and follow Yellowdig Engage articles. But almost everything else you would also need to get support would be at the top of help.yellowdig.com. So there's an instructor certification course that we highly recommend for any new users. If you want to get, if you want a colleague or you want to tell a colleague about Yellowdig, we would recommend, sending them through the certification course as well. But that we think is a great resource. There's a set of orientation videos that are there, that will instruct students or are useful for instructors. The status page is also there, so if you think that Yellowdig, might be having some kind of performance problem, you can check the status page to see if something has been announced or if there's a maintenance message up or something like that. And then finally, you can contact support directly from that page as well. A form comes up, you fill out that form, and it shoots an email off to us. So, I would highly recommend making that your first stop if you have any questions about the platform.
And I would add that you can tell that to your students as well. Obviously, they're not going to take the instructor certification course, but if they have any issues, support issues, that would be the right place to go. And not only that, but the knowledge base has a student section as well. I would just like to also add that any of you who might be thinking, oh, instructor certification course, I don't have time for that. It only takes about an hour at the most to go through, and it'll really give you a good feeling for the hands-on experience of the platform as well as some of the pedagogy and thought behind it.
Yeah, and the one final advantage to taking the certification course is that there's an integration inside of it that takes people to our instructor user community.
Our Yellowdig instructors support community, which we actually call the YISC, if you've heard us say that.
Yeah, so if we ever say the YISC, that's what we're talking about, the support community. But the instructor certification course will take you into there, and you can ask questions of other instructors.
All right, so that's again help.yellowdig.com, and let's move on. All right, so we do get a lot of questions from people new to Yellowdig, and even instructors who've been using it for some time, about you know, what is their role in this community? How should they manage these interactions between students? Because it is very different than the standard pedagogy that you get in, you know, the LMS discussion tools. What should the workflow be? Do you have to read every post? And to follow up on that, the second question there was, Brian, can you just go back half
I'm
a second?
sorry.
Is how do you build engagement in your communities with these students, especially with the quieter students, which sometimes can be an issue for people. So let's talk about those.
Yeah, so I mean, I think my general recommendation in terms of how to use Yellowdig is to think about it as spending your time modeling and adding value to your students, rather than the standard discussion model where your primary job is to grade, grade responses and enforce specific rules, right? And so that's our sort of overall recommendation. I think I talk about instructors being the model citizen, right? So that would include coming into a community, sharing interesting articles, sharing things that you run into when you're doing research, like a scientific article, asking questions that may have come to mind during a course or during a synchronous class session. Maybe asking a question or providing an answer to a question, a better answer to a question that a student asked in class. Those are all things that you would want students to do within a Yellowdig community. So those are the things that you should be trying to show and do those things and then say, this is the kind of stuff I want you to do. I mean, it can even be that explicit, but model the things that you want them to do, especially early in the class, and that's what they'll end up doing throughout the class.
And I would just like to add, just to build on what Brian said, he's mentioned the word modeling a few times. I think one way to think about it is we consider these communities to be instructor modeled rather than instructor led. Ultimately, these communities work best when the instructor is another citizen of the community. Maybe, the citizen who knows what's going on a little bit more, but not really the person who is, as it says there, the dictator there. They're just another citizen there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a final sort of suggestion is that I think that you have to allow for natural conversations and true discussions to be a little bit messy. They don't follow a straight line. They're going to, wander around a little bit. And I think that we see sometimes that instructors will try to constrain conversations to make sure they're really on topic, but then the conversations end up feeling fake and forced. And that's at least partially because they are when you start doing that kind of stuff. So I think there has to be a little allowance for some mess. And we'll get into more detail on that in answering one of the future questions.
And so as far as instructor workflow and workload, we've sort of come up with this sort of rules of the road, ways to think about it, think about engaging as an instructor in these courses. And that first one I think is really important. Just like Facebook or LinkedIn, you probably don't want to read every single post that is there forever and ever. So you don't need to read everything that happens in your community.
Yeah, and the second one about morning coffee is really the concept that, drop in for 5 minutes when you're drinking your morning coffee. Don't think of it as a task where you schedule to sit down at Yellowdig and do it for, 2 hours a week or something like that. Do it in smaller increments throughout, and just kind of monitor things a little bit. Your role in the community is more about monitoring, finding opportunities to participate and add value, rather than sort of reading absolutely everything that goes on. And building off of that, the feed sorts so that the most recent stuff and the things that are being actively talked about go to the top of the feed. So if something is way down in the feed, it means that it's no longer relevant, or it never was relevant and has sort of fallen down. So, in most cases, we recommend just pay attention to the top of the feed. You don't have to go that far down in order to stay up on all of the things that are happening.
And Brian, going back down to the very bottom one there, ambiguity is uncomfortable at first. Well, I think that response is something that is a little ambiguous. So I would like to ask you to sort of go a little bit further on that one.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but one of the things that we recommend in Yellowdig is that you allow students to sort of lead the discussion in a lot of ways, and not prescribe to them absolutely everything that they have to do in order to earn their grade. Admittedly, that's a little bit uncomfortable for students at first, because a lot of times in education, we tell them exactly what is expected of them, and then we give them a grade based on whether they did, X, Y, and Z. In Yellowdig, we're suggesting that you leave things a little bit more open-ended. And what we've found is that students do find that a little uncomfortable at first because they don't necessarily know what to do. They don't know what it's okay to do. And that comes back to why we think modeling is so important. So if you model the behaviors that it's okay to do, they'll learn from that. But I also think that it's really important that there is a little ambiguity, right? In real life, not everything is told, do X, Y, Z, and the outcome is known beforehand, and you can just get there, right? So the one thing that I would say is some of this ambiguity can be a little uncomfortable with students in the first week or two, but once you get them over that, they start to really participate, see the benefit in having that flexibility, and enjoy that experience. And just one other thing, I think we get a lot of questions from instructors where they think they have to lead everything, or really have to participate a lot. We actually have quite a bit of data indicating that if professors participate too much, they actually drive down participation, and students stop talking. And if you think about the analogy of walking around a real class, what usually happens when you show up to a group of students that are talking, a lot of times they stop talking and start paying attention to you. And the same kind of thing happens in a Yellowdig community. So you sometimes have to be a little bit careful injecting yourself into these conversations because you might squash them.
All right, let's see what's next. So has anyone noticed that 2020 has been an interesting year? No, nobody? Well, I've heard some things. In any case, this might spur some off-topic conversations in your course. And, some instructors are concerned about those off-topic conversations, some not as much. And we got questions about, what is the actual, what should we do about these off-topic conversations? And should we stop them? What are the best practices here? Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I often tell instructors to ask themselves a sort of set of questions when they're thinking about how to manage some off-topic stuff. So first of all, I don't think that conversations go off-topic all that often in a truly off-topic way, especially if the instructor is there just kind of nudging students along here and there when there's a slight course correction needed. But I think if you're thinking about taking points away from a student, or trying to make sure they don't earn points for a specific thing, I would ask yourself, is what the student is doing meeting any potential need for them or any other student? And that sounds really broad, but if you think about the things that a student comes into these communities needing, they might need to ask questions about something that happened in the course. They might need to just find a couple of friends that they can study with, right? They might need a little bit of personal connection in order to stay interested in various other parts of the course, right? So, if it meets a student need, I would try not to take points away from it too often. And everybody has their own sensitivity to that.
I would like to add that, when we're talking about asynchronous and oftentimes distant online courses, there is no before the class or after the class that you would normally have in a face-to-face classroom. So allowing these students and you to actually get to know each other a little bit more is something that is a great benefit of an asynchronous platform in this case. You are not constrained by the time, and these discussions can often lead to these so-called off-topic discussions can also often lead to insights that might actually end up making some sort of impact within the class itself.
Yeah, and so if we're talking about taking points from students, the where I would tend to think that you should do that is if you think it's honestly bad for the community. So if somebody's being a bully, or if somebody is being really aggressive towards somebody, take points away from them. There are ways that you can take points away, and you can give a reason for having done that. You could also direct message a student to contact them if you think they're sort of behaving inappropriately. We don't really see inappropriate behavior very often at all. Um, so I don't worry too much about that, but definitely think about, you know, the extent to which you should take points. The other thing I would say is you often don't have to worry about some of this if you really reward the behaviors that you want to see. So you can, you have the ability to put accolades on posts to sort of encourage and visually recognize those things that you think are good, right? And if students know that they can get those points and get that recognition for doing those types of things, they'll start doing them, and you won't have to worry as much about managing off topics.
And one other just quick note that might help with this, we do have the record video feature in the platform where you can go in and give a 1.5-minute video recording, where when you're starting the course, that might be a good spot to introduce yourself and also to set expectations for students in the course. Telling them, welcome to our community. I'm another citizen of the community. We're all adults here, and we're living our lives. We want to get the most out of this class. I'm sure you can come up with something better than I can, but that's sort of one way that you can sort of set the tone for the community.
Yeah. I show this picture often when we're talking about, an instructor's role, but this is a picture of something called a panopticon, which is a type of prison that they don't really build anymore. The idea here is that the guard would sit in the center tower and be able to see every prisoner 24/7. And this analogy was brought to my attention by a couple of course designers at ASU. But I like it because the fact of the matter is a lot of times students will just behave very differently and more poorly in a lot of cases if they think they're being watched all the time. The other thing that I think is important is that, there are aspects of education that maybe need to be serious, but there are also things where a little bit of fun is a little bit okay, right? And if students think that they're not allowed to have any fun, they won't want to come to the community, and it'll drive down all of their participation, and make it worse in a lot of different ways.
All right, let's see. Okay.
The other important thing, I think, is that what we really see in our data is that it's the students that are not having conversations with other students that tend to be sort of at risk of withdrawing, performing poorly in the course, what have you. So some of those interpersonal conversations that might be happening are, first of all, they're super important from an educational standpoint. And they're also sort of super important for getting students there and retaining them through the course, right? So one other thing I would just say about this is it's the student conversation and connections that probably matter as much or more than sort of anything else that's going on there. One final thing in this picture on the right, you see this blue circle is the instructor. And what we find in a lot of cases is that, if the instructor is really heavily interconnected with everybody, they'll be in the center of this mass. And what we tend to find is, honestly, those communities don't end up being as vibrant because students are not doing the interconnecting. It's the professor that's sort of dominating the space.
All right, let's.
And last thing on that is sort of, again, we see this in academic performance then too, right? Students that are not engaging in conversations with other students are the students that are tending to get poor grades or drop out of course. So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Bob.
I was just going to say, yeah. So basically, you can sort of see how your students are doing by noting how they're participating in the community, and this goes for their grade, not only for their Yellowdig participation. And I think that brings us to our next question.
Yeah, that is the segue to the next question that we got asked a lot about.
And so there are two things here that I just want to point out first. First of all, yes, that Yellowdig does have rich and accessible data for you as instructors to be able to find information on your students and to reach out with them. And in the previous slide that Brian showed, while he focused on the instructor, there were a few people out there who are outliers. They're out there and they're not really contributing in the community. And this is something that you're going to be able to see in Yellowdig and be able to address. So let's see, how do we look at that data?
Yeah, so when you're inside of a community, this is a a sample course for us, Business 101. When you're inside of the community, in the left-hand nav is the community health area, and here we've sort of produced some summary statistics on posts, comments, reactions, and we break those also down by week so that you can see, if you tried some different things throughout the course in different weeks, you can see how it influences student participation. One variable that we surface is the conversation ratio. We think this is super important, again, because the number of comments and back and forth conversation that we get is really what seems to predict almost every other positive variable: grades, amount of participation, voluntary participation over the goal. And in a typical discussion forum, this would be 2. 1 comment to 2 is usually what people sort of create a discussion assignment around. Post once, comment twice. In Yellowdig, we hope that this number is upward of 7 or 8, and we've seen that you continue to get positive impacts from driving that conversation ratio higher.
So I would say that is a great sort of global view of your community, but let's talk about in the topics area how we can sort of use that data to check on individual students, and also in the reports area.
Yeah, so within the topics area, you can use topics in Yellowdig and then make students tag each post with a topic. When you're doing that, we collect data about how often those topics are being used, which you can see in this topics area. This lets you know if a specific topic was sort of particularly interesting to students, and dig in a little bit on why that might be. Maybe students didn't understand it, so they're asking a lot of questions in that topic. Maybe they really were interested in something that happened, or something that happened that week, or whatever, and maybe you can bring that into your next synchronous session and have a conversation about it. The other thing that you can do is come down and look at activity per student with topics, and maybe a specific student is focused on one topic. Again, maybe they're really not understanding it, so they're asking a lot of questions, or maybe this student is was an accountant in this case, and might be a good opportunity for you to ask them to talk about something that is part of their expertise in a synchronous session or something like that. There's some interesting ways that you can use that data.
And I would just add that in order to make that data fully accessible, one of, I think, the most valuable things you can do in the platform is to require your students to add topics to every post. And that's available in the settings area under topics, where you get to choose that. And it doesn't, the topics can align, you design the topics, they can be aligned to your your high level syllabus subject matter, and also some general topics like questions or introductions or something like that. But that does 2 things for you. First of all, it makes searching for anything under these, well, it does 3 things. It lets you see that data that we just showed you. It lets you search for anything under that particular topic by simply clicking on the topic tag. And thirdly, it makes those students sort of, instead of just bringing any random piece of something into the course, it makes them think about what they're bringing in and where it fits into the course. If they have to add a topic tag, then they have to reflect on where it goes and why they're bringing it in.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another good strategy for kind of making sure things don't get too far off topic, right? Is sort of having a set of topics that you consider, appropriate, if you will. I wanted to show the health check area because I think that this is an interesting area for a lot of people, and we definitely got specific questions about how those scores are calculated and stuff like that. So in the health check area, first of all, we have some of the best practices that we can check off of the database, and just show to you whether you're sort of checking the box on them. You can click to go to the settings to change them. And obviously we recommend that you check all the boxes. But below that are different community health scores that I want to talk through really quickly. So we think of participation in communities as having possibly 3 elements, a whole bunch more, I'm sure. But one of the things that you would expect students to do is come in and share something, create a post, create a comment, rack up a certain amount of word count as their participation. a lot of these things are the typical things that a discussion assignment would focus on in order to get a grade. You have to post, you have to comment, you have to share links, right? Sharing is great, but if people don't actually read the things that are posted, they're not going to learn from them, and they're not going to be able to discuss them and interact around them. So in Yellowdig, we're also surfacing other data and continuing to build on other data that would indicate that students are listening to one another, actually reading each other's posts, clicking on hyperlinks, and actually interacting with each other and connecting with more of the class, right? So if you asked us, the most important things amongst these scores are probably the two latter ones, listening and interacting, because they indicate that students are actually engaged in what's going on and connecting together in a community. Now, obviously, you need to have sharing in order for any of that to happen. But just to let you know what these scores are, basically, each of these variables is being percentile scored against either Yellowdig's global data or data from your individual network. And you'll be able to select that if your network has more than a certain number of communities.
So
go ahead, Bob.
yeah, no, I just think that you know, we want to make sure that people are aware of this. Sticking with the question, we also maybe want to show some of the report areas where people can ask on data. But I also want to mention to people who are posting questions in the chat and in the Q&A, if you got here late, we did solicit questions before the event because we wanted to make sure we could cover as much as possible. Towards the end of the event, we will try to answer additional questions. So we're not ignoring what you've posted. We're just sort of waiting to get through the questions that we've received. And I also am seeing that some of the questions that are posted are questions that we are going to answer in some way. So just stand by and we will get to those. But let's go to the reports area real quickly, Brian.
Yeah, just to quickly
and let's just focus on the members report.
This score here is a average percentile of all of the variables underneath of it, right? So for listening, it's the average percentile of those, and that's how we get those scores. So, you know, this community has a lot of interacting compared to the Yellowdig global average. For reports, there's, you know, the point report. Inside of here, you can see how individual students have earned their points. And you can also deduct or add points for any reason whatsoever. So, you know, all of those are available right within the point reports area. There are also additional community and member reports that will generate something like 70 variables about how all of the students are participating within your community. So you can get really, really fine level data from those reports, and it'll generate a CSV, or it will display right in the community there. So those reports are also a really great way to pull data out of the platform if you have any deeper analyses that you want to do, you know, with that data.
All right, let's move on to the next. Just being conscious of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we did receive, and in the chat there are still some questions about this, about points and the buffer and time off. And these are questions that come up again and again. And I think we have some ways to, well, first give you a better understanding of the platform itself and how the points are designed and what they're supposed to do in the buffer itself, and also strategies for doing some of these things if you feel you need to.
Yeah, so I think it's important to think about the initial framework for discussions that probably everybody is familiar with. So, you know, typically an instructor will post a prompt. Students will have to answer that prompt. And then you'll start with another prompt the next week in a sort of bucketed fashion where students are responding to a single prompt each week. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. We see some really huge problems with this pedagogy itself that are really unavoidable no matter how good your prompts are, no matter how good you are as an instructor, no matter how dedicated and motivated your students are. Number one, students that are really go-getters and want to come in and start a conversation come into a community that's completely blank every week, and the only person they have to talk to is responding to the prompt, right? So they actually learn to come back later and later every week, and they start procrastinating more and more. That's something that we saw as a huge problem at Yellowdig. There are a number of other problems. Nobody likes grading or to be graded. And also, in this model, the procrastinating student is sort of not interacting with anybody in reality, right? When they come in at the very end, they're responding to an instructor prompt. They're responding to other students, but nobody is ever reading or responding to anything they do. That's not very motivating, nor is it very educationally useful.
I'd like to add that in addition to that, so students plan their lives around this as an assignment that's due at a particular date, Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So that does, in and of its nature, prompt them to go towards the end of that period to submit it. In addition to that, once everybody has gone in there and submitted their posts, now you have an opportunity for conversations, but that board is shut off and no one will ever go and look at it again except that poor instructor who has to grade those 30, 60, 100 essays all written to the same prompt.
So we were definitely trying to sort of break down that entire framework in the design of Yellowdig. And so the point system, and specifically the buffer, and the point system was really designed to run throughout the entire course, where students are earning points throughout. And although there is this notion of a weekly reset, a weekly, the weekly reset of the maximum, if you use the buffer, there's not truly deadlines in Yellowdig, right? So you actually stop being able to earn points whenever you hit the maximum. And just at the beginning of every week, that maximum goes down to 0 so that you can start earning more points again. But there's not really a notion of a deadline in the platform. And when you increase the buffer, you allow students a lot more flexibility in how and when they earn their points. But the real concept of Yellowdig then was to not have beginning and ends of conversations unless they sort of died out naturally or shifted to another topic naturally, right? And in doing that, first of all, there's no deadline to procrastinate to, really. Students are able to come in to a community that always has active conversations going on, and those conversations can continue as needed. We also think that students should be able to ask their own questions, which they can't do in a prompted discussion framework. And students can't come and share their own interesting things.
And just to from an instructor perspective, me having taught American government for a long time, in week 2, when I talk about the Constitution and the process for selecting a Supreme Court justice that the president appoints and the Senate confirms, that's great. But in week 7, when the president appoints a new chief justice, or a new justice, excuse me, I want my students to be able to discuss that. And they can do that here in Yellowdig at their own accord. Let's move forward.
So to break down our point system a little bit and answer the question now more completely, Yellowdig was intended to be a single semester long assignment. There's a start date, there's an end date, with the idea that there's no ending of good conversations in between. And within that framework, students just earn their points in one big bucket. It fills one big bucket. I think that's one thing that's important to understand, right? The participation goal that you set is really a goal for the entire course. And so as students are posting to get their posts and comments for participation, there's a set of those that I would say are purely participation based, right? You post 40 words or 20 words, you earn a certain number of points for those posts and comments. And we do think about that as really a participation grade, much like showing up to class and getting an attendance grade. It's the social points that reward articulate and thoughtful posts that are made earlier in the week. And so those points are part of what changes the behavior. It gets students to come in earlier, within an earning period and continue to earn those points and try to write things that are engaging and interesting to other students that will actually get them going on a good back and forth conversation. If you think about the sort of weekly maximum in that framework, the buffer within that framework, all the buffer is doing is allowing students to earn a little bit ahead, or if they fall behind, they can catch up, right? And so if you think about all of the points going to one giant bucket, you set that buffer a little bit higher and students can earn a little bit ahead. Each week their grade will be based on the points that they had earned in the previous one, and we'll continue on.
Yeah, let's go back to that. I think let's be sure that people understand how the buffer itself sort of is calculated, or how you can calculate it in order to take into account those break weeks or what have you. I think that's an important thing to sort of say, because we did get a number of comments about people wanting to add a week off or a point-free week or something to that effect.
Yeah. So we do have a sort of math equation to help you think about exactly how to get those buffers set to what you would want. But essentially, you know, if you think about the buffer concept and you make it high enough so that students can earn, you know, a third week's points ahead of time, and they're able to earn a third additional each time, they would have, you know, after 3 weeks be able to get take a week off, right? So in this equation, you would basically just set what you think your weekly target is, the total number of weeks for the course, and the desired number of weeks off, and you can come up with a number that will, you know, indicate what you have to sort of set the buffer points at. You know, the overall concept is, you know, in a 10-week course, if you had 4 weeks off, or if you had 10 weeks and you set the buffer at 25%, students would be able to participate in 4 weeks, 8 out of 10 weeks, you know, through the course.
And I just want to add to this that, you know, we are mid-semester at this point, and you know, some of you may still have questions about what to do if this is not, you know, what you want to do. And as Brian showed you in the members area before, excuse me, in the reports area before, under the student reports, you have the ability to add points and give an explanation. So if there was a particular week that for some reason you just wanted to give the students credit for that and you hadn't considered the buffer beforehand, you could add the weekly points during that earning period by clicking the plus minus points button, and then adding the weekly total, and then, or excuse me, the earning period total, and then putting a comment there just to make it all clear that, you know, 3 points week or something to that effect. You can also go at the end of the semester or term, what have you, and then also do the same thing. I think the key is to be careful of the earning period that you are adding those points.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general concept of the buffer is, honestly, if you provide a big enough buffer, students will be able to pick and choose when they participate. They'll be more attentive when they're actually doing it, if they don't feel pressure that they have to post something with nothing interesting to say. But they'll still have to get all of their points by the end of the course, right? So the only thing that we're really trying to do with that weekly target, with that weekly sort of maximum, we're just trying to spread out their participation over enough of the course that they're participating and being a part of the community. If without the weekly limit, students would be able to come in the last week of the class or the first week of the class, do all of their participation without actually interacting with other students. And we know that that's bad. So just think of the weekly target with the added buffer as being something that sort of limits the number of points students get so that they earn them throughout the course. But if you give students flexibility, they'll use it in really good ways, right? If they want to take a week off for spring break, and you've given them a week off by making that buffer bigger, they'll take it, you know, if they want to, or if they want to work during spring break, maybe it's good. Maybe they find something interesting during spring break and they think, I got to go to Yellowdig, right? That would be wonderful. You know, if you think about this community as being evergreen throughout your entire course, then the idea is that they should be able to participate sort of as they want and when they want. And we just want to make sure that they have to do it enough to move through.
Brian, it's 1:45. I want to make sure that we have time to continue and take some other questions at the end. So next question is, how can I assign students to talk about things and assess them? I'm not sure I have a good sense of what that question was about. So if you have any insights, I would be happy to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up with quite a few questions about how to assign students to talk about specific things. And you know, one way that you can draw students' specific attention to one thing would be to pin to the top. So there's a notion when you create a post, there's a pin to top option. It's going to take me a second to get there, but you can click on the pin to top functionality, and then in the feed, students will see that main post whenever they come in there. So that's one way you can focus them on one specific thing in creating a post. But by and large, we don't really think that you should be prompting students and assessing them. Assessing students definitely sort of kills how much they're willing to participate and sort of have real conversations. There's the pin to top option there that you can, you know, then be able to have it show up at the top of the feed. But that recommendation is also coming from student behavior data. So, you know, we talked about procrastination and prompts. What we see are two really clear things when people put prompts into Yellowdig. And the gray lines here are your weekly rollover dates, right? In an open-ended community, students actually come in at the beginning of the week and start to participate and post their comments. And then those conversations continue across the week. When there's prompts, all of the students come in at the end of the week. And one interesting thing is you actually see that pattern emerge, right? So I talked about that earlier, but at the beginning of the course, there weren't as many students participating as there are, or procrastinating as there are at the end. So they're actually creating procrastinators, whereas the pattern is sort of opposite here. Students learn, hey, if I get started earlier, I get a little bit more points, right? The other important thing is here, the baseline is way higher. So students are actually posting almost twice as much in this community on the left throughout the week. So they're coming in early, getting started, and then they're having interesting conversations off of that.
And as Brian showed earlier, posting more means higher grades. I think we should move on to the next question.
Yeah. So here we go.
So this is one that comes up a lot, and I've seen some questions in the chat about this as well. How does class size impact participation and instructor approaches? I mean, that you could have as few as 7 people in your class, or you could have, we have communities with 5,000 people in the class. Does it make a difference, Brian?
Yeah, there are some differences, so I'm not going to say that there aren't, but you know, from all of the data that I've been able to find to try to answer this question, to get a good answer to it, there doesn't seem to be a strong tie between class size or group size and posting behavior, which is to say there are a lot of other decisions that you'll make that will matter a lot more than the size of your community. And I'm going to color that in with a little bit of feedback that we've gotten from people about class sizes, right? So if you think about how Yellowdig is designed, we have a single scrolling feed. You only see one post and a few comments at a time as you're scrolling. So if there are 1,000 students and they're posting all the time, any student that comes into that community is still only seeing a post or a couple of posts at a time, and they scroll through, right? So it's not overwhelming for students to be in really large classes typically.
I think the only thing I would add is that in the very smaller classes, it's probably to some degree a question of critical mass, and it's probably useful for the instructor and students to make sure that they are doing more of the reading in those communities, just to get them off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, and an important thing to say about really small communities or really small groups, a lot of people think, oh, I want intimate groups where students are going to really get to know each other. But if you make those groups too small, they don't produce enough content. You know, 5 students, it's harder for them to produce enough content to really drive students to come back and always be curious about what's happening and what's going on, and sort of like, you know, having enough interesting new stuff there each time they come that they'll be inclined to come back. So there is a slight danger to using too small of groups.
So that brings us to our next issue, and that is groups, and that was right there. So we get a lot of questions about using student groups in Yellowdig. And yes, there is functionality for student groups, but the fundamental question here is, you know, what is it that you want to get out of these groups? Why do you want to have the groups? I think that's the first question, but I'm interested in Brian, in your recommendations on using groups.
Yeah, so, you know, I tend to think that having larger communities is better for a lot of different reasons. And then, you know, sort of identifying if there is a need for smaller groups or smaller communities. And that cuts across, you know, every type of community for our platform. I would suggest not starting with too small groups, you know, for anything. You know, as far as how you can use them within the course, when you enable groups, it will automatically assign students to their groups randomly. And you have the ability to flip this public visibility flag. When groups are enabled and students are assigned to groups, any post that they create is tagged with their group, with the group tag. And that group tag can be filtered. If you have public visibility on, that means that all of the students will be able to see each other's posts, no matter what group they're in, but their tags will still, you know, their posts will still be tagged with a group. So their group would be able to filter by, you know, other people that posted with their group.
Brian, if I'm in group 2 and there's public visibility, can I comment on a group 1 post?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so, you know, you would be able to sort of cross pollinate comments then. The public visibility, when you turn that off, it makes the groups not know that the other groups exist, right? So the entire platform will start to look like, you know, students would only see other members of their group. The specific reason for that is we had, you know, some of these really large communities with 1,000 students, and they wanted students to participate in smaller groups. So a lot of people asked us about that. You can turn the public visibility off, and then students will only, you know, will only experience that community as if there's, you know, if you had 1,000 and you had 10 groups, each community would only be 100 students. And then, you know, they would only be able to see students in their group. The
Yes.
reason for doing that is that instructors then can post and all of the groups will see it, but students will only see each other's posts within the
Right.
group.
So being conscious of the time, I think the key takeaway is consider the numbers of students for groups and the ability to maintain good communication and engagement with the smaller numbers. All right, we only have a few minutes left. We want to get to some of the new features and some of the outstanding questions. I do think that Brian and I are happy to stay after 1 o'clock for anyone who wants to join us. And I know that let's answer one more question, then we'll get to the new features. I don't
think
really
the
know where
one
we
more
are.
question was the product roadmap.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So, you know, we released some new features recently, and I guess I should jump back into the. But these are things that are either, you know, under beta flags that we can definitely enable for different people if they're interested, or that are already in the platform that we wanted to show. One is the grade passback feature. So this might not actually be that informative for this class because it's not connected to the.
It's a demo.
Yeah, it's a demo board. But the grade passback page will show you students that are in the class, when their grade was passed and the result of that. And you can run a sync from inside of the course. So if you're noticing anything that you think is a problem, you can run this grade passback and you'll get a report about which students succeeded or failed, and a little bit of information that might help us figure out why they failed, if they failed, things like that. So this feature is something new, but it allows you to sync grades to the current time so that you're sure that you're seeing the latest activity. I forget what the other ones were. It was
Network graph is definitely one of them.
The network graph is a visualization that's based on the same things that we showed before, but you'll be able to see students within your community, who's connected to each other, who's not connecting to other people. You can see their lovely faces if you would like to. And as you hover over different students, you'll be able to see when they last received responses or last connected with other people. So if there is a student that's sort of often, sort of heading out of the connection of the community, you might find a reason to reach out to them, or maybe sort of engage with them in some interesting ways. And there's a chart with data also indicating, how many connections these students are getting. So that's an interesting new feature, and we're sort of thinking about additional ways to build on that as we go forward. And then the last one was, community health, and we already covered that.
So it is 1:56. Kaylee, I know that we have a couple of other sessions coming up. Would you like to mention those for us?
Sure thing. Yes. At the end of this month, we have a guest webinar with Vicki Hart from University of Vermont. She's going to talk about her experience using Yellowdig. She used it in a pretty unique way. She used Yellowdig as more of like a help forum for her students. So that's going to be a really cool use case that she's going to share with us on October 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I will go ahead and drop that link in the chat as well. And then we did already schedule a second office hours session for November 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to be addressing some different questions. There were a lot of great questions in the chat and Q&A section that we're going to hopefully address here shortly. But, if you didn't get your questions addressed or have new questions come November, you can certainly attend that one, and I'll drop that in the chat as well.
Thank you, Kaylee. And we hope this format worked pretty well for people. We just thought it made more sense, instead of having questions stepping on top of each other, to try to organize them and get them in advance. We do think that we answered most of the questions that we did get in submitted in advance, and that many of them were similar to the questions that you were posting in your in the Q&A and in the chat. So we're probably going to be doing a similar format for the next one, but we certainly welcome any feedback for that. And all that being said, I think now we can open it up for other questions. And I'm not sure if we should do that by looking in the chat, or if we should do audio.
Yeah, I saw a question about groups and whether students can see the members of their other groups. I mean, the easiest way for people to do that currently is to sort of filter by group and see the other students that are participating in their group. That is something that we've gotten some feedback about and that we're going to build on. There is another aspect of the group functionality that we've gotten a lot of questions about, and that's on our roadmap. But the ability to select the audience, select the group when you're posting, or select to post to the entire community. So there is, a feature on our roadmap to get those things working for groups for sure. So hopefully that answers the one question about.
I did forget one thing before people left, and that is to thank you very much for coming. So thank you for coming. And again, we'll still be here and happy to take more questions. In fact, I think it's fine if people turn on their audio, or if we turn on their audio for them, or is that not a good idea?
I don't mind doing that if people raise their hands. I'm not sure how to do it all at once. I'm also.
Well, I can click allow to talk when I see a hand raised, I guess is the best way to do that.
I can go ahead and raise some questions too. Okay. So we had a couple questions about nudging. So nudge notifications, how to get students that are maybe not the most active engaging, a couple questions along that line. Or those lines.
So we didn't talk about product roadmap, but that was one of the other things that we were going to talk about a little bit. We are creating a new point meter for the My Participation page that will hopefully make earning points very, very clear. Reminders is what we're calling nudge notifications. We do have a few of those in the pipeline, and we have some really good ideas for going forward. So we're hoping that those will be engaged soon, so that if a student is not participating, you'll be able to configure an email message to go out to them at that time. One of the other things we're adding is a free-form point system, so that you don't have to set a start and an end date. The upside to that is sort of flexibility. The downside is that there's not currently going to be a point limiter and we know that that helps student participation. So we would still recommend the sort of current point system for most classes, but there are open enrollment courses and co-curricular communities that really need a more flexible point system. We're making some, menu and navigation changes for sure, and we are also working on a mobile app. We've gotten a lot of questions about that. I think, especially with some of the co-curricular communities, that mobile experience is super important.
I think we ought to take a look at the Q&A
Yep.
area.
Yep. There were a couple others. So there were a couple questions about grade passback. Specifically, these questions were about Canvas. But so one question was, if we're not originally, passing the grade back to Canvas from Yellowdig, but change that in the middle of the semester, will Yellowdig automatically start passing points back into Canvas?
So if you have points on in Yellowdig and students have collected points within the platform, if you set up a graded assignment within the course, it will start passing grades back to that graded assignment. The only thing that I think is really important to say, if you're going to do any strategy where you put the assignment in later in the course, is that every single student has to click in through the assignment link in order for us to know where to send the grade. So if you try to do that at the end of a course and students aren't participating, or they don't click in through that assignment, the grade passback will not work. So that would be the one thing that I would say. What we see a lot of people doing, if they don't like what it's showing in Canvas or something like that, is just to mute the gradebook column in Canvas. And Bob, I know you've worked with some people on doing this. That's what you would typically recommend, or what you've typically been showing them, right?
Yeah, and the other side of that coin, as far as keeping students clear about what their points total are and where they stand, is within the Yellowdig platform itself. And Brian, I think, can show you the points bar, which is going to be modified. This is where I would just go right up to the points bar, Brian.
Oh, sorry.
And the points bar is really the best resource for students to see exactly where they are in Yellowdig, not worrying about any calculations on the Canvas end that really don't necessarily make a big difference until the end of the semester in any case. So the points bar shows you what the total for the semester is on the left of the participation grade, what you've earned to that extent up there, and you can show right at the top of what you've opened, Brian. Yeah, and then on the right, it will show you the weekly points, what you've earned for that earning period as well. And then as you scroll down, drum roll, there we go. This is a demo account with a demo person, but there is a whole My Participation area where you will be able to see the what you have posted, and clicking on that My Participation will take you in deeper to that. So for students, the best resource during the semester is unquestionably to go to the points bar to get that information.
They can also see their own point log below that in My Participation.
Right,
this will tell them all of the reasons that they did or did not earn points, right? So, this comment with a minimum of 20 words didn't get any points because they only posted with 13 words, right? If they hit the weekly maximum, it will show that they've hit it. Here, the professor subtracted points from them and can give a reason which they didn't do. But this point log is also really informative for people if they think that they haven't gotten points. It'll usually tell them why they did or did not in the context of this log. And you can see the individual student logs from within the reports area that we were showing you earlier.
So what else do we have, Kaylee?
Okay, so we have a couple follow-up questions on groups. So someone asked about if groups can be turned on and off during the semester so that you can kind of divvy into that.
Yeah, if you needed to turn groups on and off during a semester, I would just I would turn the groups on, assign the students, and then flip the visibility flag, um, so that any new posts would only be seen by the group uh, when you have public visibility off. As I said, we are developing an audiences feature that will allow students to post to either their group or the full community. That's something um, I'm very excited about having in the platform. A lot of people have been asking us about that. So that's something that we are building in.
And I think some of the other people who asked questions are no longer here. So I think that the 14 folks who are still here, if there are any questions that you particularly have, we'd be happy to answer those now. Or if I missed somebody who actually did submit a question earlier, I'd be happy to answer that too. So you can either raise your hand or put something in the chat or hang up. I don't know.
So, students, I see a question that says, what about students using it in multiple classes? So I didn't get into sort of the navigation of Yellowdig, but as students are added into different communities, they'll be able to go to the My Communities area and see every single community that they're a part of. So this is what Yellowdig looks like inside of, yep.
I'm just going to interrupt because the question actually, there's another line to the question. And the question is about whether students being in multiple communities are overwhelmed. And I guess I would say that they're in multiple classes with similar multiple class requirements. And you know, you could look at it like, well, if they're in the standard, you know, LMS discussion boards, are they overwhelmed there? The other part of it is, you know, are they overwhelmed looking on their Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder accounts as well? And I don't know if that's the kind of answer you're looking for, but you know, being a student, there are responsibilities with regard to that. And focusing on the class, Yellowdig offers them the opportunity to do that in a way that's asynchronous and not having to sort of be only in the class to think about it. So I think the way to look at it is to look at it from the other side of the coin. And I'm open to anything else that you say, Brian.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a reasonable concern, right? That students can be overwhelmed by anything that's going on in school. But I would say, you know, this shouldn't be any more overwhelming than asking students to do, you know, a discussion prompts for every single community or for every single course either. And we know that happens.
And we're also saying that we're allowing students to participate in their own way here as well. Ask the questions that they want. This is not you know, so much an assignment as a community. I hope that helps, Marianne.
And thanks for interrupting me, Bob, because I was answering a completely different.
Well, okay, great. Anyone else have anything? All right.
All right. Well, we'll definitely send out the recording, and we'll either put some of these questions in the chat that maybe we did miss, or the Q&A that maybe we did miss, and maybe apply that to the future session. We're also happy to sort of answer individual questions as needed. So.
You know, before we go, there are 2 more questions that just came in, and I think they're worth answering if you have a moment, Brian.
I do.
All right. And now I got to read them again because I just lost them in my, Okay, so the first one was, do you see a difference between material-based classes versus experience and skill-based classes? There is a lot more to talk about in the first kind of class. And, you know, the way I normally think about this is sort of between STEM classes and, you know, arts and literature types of classes. And Yellowdig seems to work equally well in both of those concepts because it does allow the real world learning to come in that students might not have the ability to really deal with in 50 minutes 3 times a week. But in the way that you've framed it, I'm interested if there's another perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought about sort of experience or skill-based classes versus material-based ones. Um, for sure, we see people with STEM courses or highly technical courses doing a lot more Q&A than sort of discussion or debate, if you will. Um, uh, and I guess I'm curious a little bit about like what types of classes you would consider just flat skill based. I think one thing that we see though is that students often find really interesting, really useful things to tie any class to the real world or to their own experiences, to something they're doing in a job. Um, some of our adult learning, adult sort of adult learner classes or professional courses, we see a lot of people sharing really interesting things from their own, professional experiences. So I think in some cases, uh, even some of those skill-based things end up having really useful articles online or really really interesting things to talk about and share that may not come up uh, in a normal synchronous class.
The last question that we got is something we sort of addressed to a degree earlier, um, about political content, what's happening now. And certainly this is the world we live in, and students are in that world as well. It's hard to put that out, but again, you want to. I think going back to Brian's like almost the first slide about is it bad for the community, I think is the bottom line. And Brian, anything else?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. I mean, I think people have different sensitivities to what they consider appropriate, and it's kind of hard for me to say like what the tolerance should be. I will say that we very rarely see anything that devolves into, what I would consider sort of truly bad stuff. And so I think in general, students know that their name is associated with their posts. If you are establishing a really healthy community, they know that they're interacting with other students and and that they're spending social capital if they act like a jerk. So a lot of students are not willing to go out on that limb and look like a jerk in front of other students because there are sort of social pressures around these situations. So I mean, I'm always interested in hearing about people's reactions, and if you're experiencing things, I'd love to have a conversation. But I think people tend to worry about that stuff a lot more than it actually happens.
All right. I think that's pretty much all that we have at the moment. We hope that you found this worthwhile, and we're going to try to do more of these. And we did mention this before, but the cadence that we're sort of thinking about here, and we'd love to have some feedback from you, is one more towards the end of the semester, and then perhaps one before the beginning of the next semester for any other types of setting up and startup issues going forward. Anyway, those are just some of the things we're thinking. I think we'll leave it at that. And thanks again. We'll send out the recording.
Bye, everyone.